Hey, Eric. Jeremy. More people should join. Kara and Mary. Let's give a few minutes for them to join. I can turn my camera on as well, so Kara, you don't feel alone. You can hear me, yeah? Because I don't get any acknowledgement about.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've had to.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
You want me to share my screen, Kara, or would you want to do that?
If you're willing to do so, that would be really lovely, actually.
Yeah. Let me start sharing. So I hope I am sharing the right browser, which should be the meeting agenda and stuff. Is that what you are seeing?
Yeah, that is what I'm seeing. Great.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you.
Yeah.
So welcome, everyone, to the Interoperability SIG. I don't think we have any action items to go over. Is that right, Fatih? Because I'm not seeing any in our list.
Yeah, we had few, but they need some time for us to, fix like the white paper stuff, which we discussed on Slack. So we don't have any action item.
Good. And then I've got a really nice, happy announcement, which is that the CDCon CFPs are open. I've left a link in the notes to where you can submit and find out a little bit more about it. I have had questions from European, especially individuals in Europe who maybe their company is not allowing them to travel yet, and they won't know how that policy evolves until after the CFP closes. And what I have advised is please submit your talks. We certainly want to have excellent talks from as many people as possible, and most certainly from our active community. In addition, my feeling is that a lot of these rules are going to be revised, and to the extent to which they are revised, they were likely to be changed more or less in tandem. So fingers crossed, everything just gets better and better and we're all in person and everyone can start traveling again. If that's not the case, it is likely to not be the case more or less across the board. So CDCon itself has a potential to switch time. I mean, if something horrible happens, there is the ability to move the in-person conference at a different point within the following 12 months. That is not right now foreseen at all. But I'm just saying, I would submit your talks if you were willing to fly and would generally be able to fly over and speak in person. And fingers crossed, all the different rules and regulations we have around the world and in our different situations come together. And so we're able to actually come together as people and meet in person, which I very much look forward to. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask. Okay, so that's it. Just please submit your talks. We're super excited to read them and review them and to welcome you all in person at CDCon. Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it at that. There's other stuff maybe, but I'm not going to talk about that. And then for SIG interoperability, very sadly, Fatih, who has been probably the world's best co-chair ever, has really done an amazing job in the SIG, working on the white paper, arranging great speakers, leading sessions, bringing us all together on this topic and moving our understanding on this topic forward. I am so sad to hear that, naturally enough, after 2 years, it is time for him to step down. And so we are looking for another co-chair of the interoperability SIG. Fatih, though, happily will remain involved in the SIG. So thank you very much, Fatih, for everything you've done for the interoperability SIG.
It's my pleasure.
Is there anyone on the call? What I will likely do is send out an email asking for people to raise their hand if they're interested in being co-chair. But while we're all here together now, is there anyone who would be interested in being co-chair who is on this call or would consider it? And would you like to hear more about what it involves and just discuss it further?
Yeah, just to add to that, like if some of you are interested to become co-chair, but you are not comfortable to state it right now, you can reach out to me or Kara on Slack and we can talk about like what, like, is it like what kind of effort you need to put, and sometimes we can give you some information about those things and try to answer any questions you may have. So it's fun thing to, you know, because you have opportunity to reach out to different communities, talk with different people, bring them to here, or you go to their communities and, you know, try to bring people together to work on these things together. So like I urge any of you who have slight interest to think about this seriously and just, as I said, ask anything you may want to learn.
Great, thank you, Fatih. Just to reiterate, definitely we're both available. You can ping us on Slack or by email with any questions. Fungi has put in the chat that the CFP for Open Infra Summit in Berlin in June is also now open. Would you like to speak to this subject?
Oh, yeah, no, it was just announced the CFP in the past week. There's a CI/CD track, and they're accepting talk submissions, and it's scheduled for June 7th through 9th in Berlin.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, if there are people who are worried about being able to travel from Europe to the US for a CI/CD related event or opportunity to get together, then that would be, I guess, a way they could do it a bit closer to home.
Yep, that's right. Thank you. In addition, we're likely to have a half-day gathering, sort of a co-located event, but maybe a little less formal, sort of a contributor summit event connected to KubeCon Europe in May in Valencia. More details as that becomes finalized will be announced, but I would imagine a number of people in this group would be interested in that discussion and being involved. So by all means, if you're at KubeCon keep an eye out for the event because it should be really fun.
So while we are talking about events, maybe I can add one more event to the list. Some of you may remember a new event was started by Linux Foundation called Supply Chain Security Conference, which took place in October as Day Zero event for KubeCon North America. Linux Foundation now took it under Open Source Summit, and CFPs for that event is also open both for Europe and North America one. So if you are into supply chain area, if you want to propose a talk about the supply chain challenges or ideas you might want to look at that, I am trying to find the link for it, and I will put it in the chat and on the meeting minutes. I don't remember exact dates, but both Open Source Summit Europe and Open Source Summit North America seems to have the Supply Chain Security Con as one of the events they will host. Yeah, found it. So this is North America one, I think. But yeah, I will put the link so you can take a look at it.
Thank you, Fazzy. And then we have new work around terminology for our pipeline stages and steps. Anne-Marie, Fred, would you like to speak to this point?
Hello, I'm new. Nice to meet you all. So yeah, the reason that I thought this would be helpful is I'm working on a project where we're trying to get some better open source code reuse out of some work that IBM had done around something called One Pipeline, which is a security compliance pipeline. I was looking at that. Red Hat is trying to implement something very similar. There's also another project, I think it's called Plogios, that Red Hat had been working on with the US government. Anyway, I looked across these projects and I saw that the sequence of steps that people go through in a compliance pipeline is usually the same. So they're doing the exact same things. They're just plugging in different tools to accomplish the same goal. And it would be very helpful if we could say, okay, now I have a step that is of type, sign my code. And I know that, that's what it's going to do semantically, and everybody understands that that's what a step signing my code does. And so there's two pull requests and I think the stage, there's the step types and the stages. I think the stage one is easier. The pipeline stage terminology is basically what people talk about when they talk about the DevOps loop cycle diagram, right? So they talk about plan, develop, test, whatever. So we could look at that one first. That one's gotten some more early feedback, I think. And
so which one? You say stage or step?
Let's
or
look
you
at
want
stage.
to share your screen? If you want to share your screen on
Sure.
those, I can stop. Yeah.
Why not? Okay. Share Chrome. All right. Does that work?
Yes. Stage.
Okay. So let's look at this. So this one I was trying to keep really high level. I won't read it all. But there's some caveats at the beginning, this document overall says, well, not everybody agrees what a stage is even, but that there seems to be some consensus about that. But the actual stages, let me put it in formatted form. Here, okay. So quick summary first. We have build, test, release, deploy, and maintain. And there's kind of a summary here of what each of these things are taking as inputs and generating as outputs. And then in the details up here, there's also information on what the semantics are, like what we expect to happen, aliases, and other results and side effects. So yeah, so that was that one. Anything anybody wanted to discuss about that here other than in the pull request chat?
I have a question in general, actually. Now, it's great that you started. I'm Mary. When I was looking at the pull requests, both of them, like I commented on the pull requests already, but my question is like, are you trying to capture the current state, or should we, I don't know if it is the right place to do that, but should we look at promoting some kind of good practices as part of this document? What is like, is it like the current state of affairs or wanted state in this terminology?
So this one is certainly based on current state right now, although it is a little bit idealistic. But yeah, in terms of stages in particular, like what sorts of things would you suggest that would be more like best practices that aren't here?
Yeah, I think about this, especially the setup step as part of build stage. I think Eric had a similar comment for step. So like what I noticed there is like build environment setup is considered as part of build stage in the stages PR. And I feel like those things, setup steps, could perhaps be considered as separate stages, and build stage only deals with building artifact. Whatever happens before that or after that, maybe they are distinct stages. So the build environment setup could take in its own set of input files like configuration files or whatever is required to set the build environment or test environment. And then it is ready, the build stage kicks in, doing its own stuff. It's done, leaves the artifacts on the file system, for example. Another stage or step uploads those things, and the final stage could tears down the resources. Like, again, it's just, is it like current state? That's why I asked, like, is it describing current state or wanted state?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this should be the current state best practice when it comes to having distinct stages for setting up and cleaning things up. So that's why I asked the original question.
Honestly, I think, yeah, I mean, I think setup could be something you could see within each of these stages, right?
Yeah.
These I want to be pretty high level, without getting into too many implementation details. The steps definitely have more implementation details. But I think if you, like, for example, if you think of it as like the DevOps cycle diagram, people don't really talk about setup and cleanup at that level, right?
Yeah. But they are definitely separate steps. But again, yeah, that makes sense if you describe that way. Like, okay,
yeah,
you can have separate setup steps and separate cleanup steps for build, test, whatever stages you may have. But yeah,
right.
if you put it that way, yeah.
Especially build and test, yeah. They usually have setup steps and clean up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the other thing, these are also, I think when people implement their builds, yeah, you'll see these. It's sometimes they'll even be different pipelines, for example, right? Not always, but okay. Anything on
I was-
this
I was
one, or should we?
Sorry, I was just going to say that from the Zool perspective, that those are what we've been calling pipelines for the past 10 years. So, you know, I have a pipeline for checking proposed changes, a pipeline for merging those changes, a pipeline for release builds, and so on, rather than those being considered different stages of a single pipeline.
Yes, sort of. Yeah, it depends on the tool, right? If I think about something like, I don't know, something simple like Jenkins or Travis CI or something like that, they usually just put them all into one big chain. So.
I think when
Yeah,
you talk about this, sorry, if you're going to talk about these stages and steps, and if there's how they relate to a pipeline and such things, I saw there, Anne-Marie, that you wrote also that those are more the de facto terms used today, stage and step. But it all relates to this vocabulary document that we started working on like 1.5 years ago or something. Yeah, that one, which we haven't yet actually made any conclusions of the what terms should be used for these kinds of things. So for example, pipeline, as you mentioned there, Frankie, well, what is a pipeline really? How do we define a pipeline? And what are the parts, the pieces of a pipeline and such things? So I think it would very much benefit if we had like some consensus on how should we conclude this vocabulary document. That would help when discussing detailed questions about the contents of a pipeline, the stage, and so on.
Right, I think that's the terminology. Is that the one? Or maybe the mapping of tools? I think it was, yeah, one of these in the exact same document. Yeah, exactly. The
Look at the
reason
tables below. You see
Oh, here
there for
it is.
each, yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, you have the many tools, you call it a pipeline, some call it a workflow, that level, and then you have the stage and job, or also on that
Right.
harness calls that a pipeline. So maybe that's what you're referring to, Frankie, maybe that you have individual pipelines for each, what other would call a stage, for the build and for the test,
Yeah.
or whatever, could be individual pipeline. So I guess if we'd have a consensus on this table, some bottom line here, what's the generic word to use, then it would help maybe.
Yeah, I think some tools encourage you to have many different pipelines too, right? And some don't. So yeah, I chose the word stage because it's the most common thing in this column. That's why I chose that term. Like I was trying to refer to this level. But at the same time, I mean, what we're really getting here is a concept. Like, what does it mean to build something? That's the real goal, not, you know, are all tools going to use the same term? Like, what does it mean to release and deploy? And this one, honestly, it's helpful to have the same vocabulary here. But for the work I'm trying to do, the steps are more important. The steps mean the same thing.
What I'm mainly trying to figure out is how to map concepts there to the environments I'm familiar with. And I think it probably is going to boil down to, these are recommendations for setting up a project, not necessarily for the tools that would be used to implement it, because the tools, for the most part, are flexible enough to be able to decompose this in a variety of different ways. So it's really more of a workflow question than a tooling question at the end of the day.
Yes, that makes sense. Yes, this is more about a workflow. I should write that down.
A question.
versus any kind of tool implementation. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, did I get correct that this was actually more like a glossary rather than the names of actually stages in a pipeline, but more like defining the terms? What does it mean to deploy something?
Yes, yes. This, and in fact, this is in the vocabulary doc.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
I
So,
guess
yeah.
when I read it, I thought it was like defining a stage in a pipeline, but if you think of it in more like what does it mean to release something, then it makes more sense.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to do here. So I think maybe just changing the introduction would be better. Okay. Can we look at the other one too? So that's the other pull request. It's up. Okay, and again, I use the most common word, even though every tool uses a different word for this thing. So a stage, I think everybody who's been doing this for a while kind of knows what this is, but it might be easier just to look at what they are. And you could get into the, no, not stages, sorry, steps. You could get into the weeds, but actually when I implement pipelines, they usually have steps with basically these names. Okay. And this is what I was seeing across all these different like reference implementations of best practice pipelines for security and compliance. Okay, so these are the steps. So set up, source, tag, check secrets, build, discover, remediate, test, coverage, code coverage, scan, build materials, package, sign, policy. Some of these are a little harder to define, like policy, like or analyze versus scan, but some of them are pretty obvious. Publish, provision, deploy, verify deployment, analyze, message, create a request, update a record, run, create a result, and clean up.
Is there any kind of an order suggested in this document, or is it just kind of a flat list?
So I know, from experience that, for example, test things get slotted in a bunch of different places in real pipelines, right? But there is sort of a logical order that usually they happen in generally this order. That's why they're not sorted alphabetically. They could be.
Well, I don't know. Tagging is something that typically happens usually after a successful deployment, although if I make sure I read this to see what it really is talking about here. Yeah, see,
Yeah,
annotating an image, that's after building the image. So if there's any kind of an order that's been suggested in this write-up, cloning the repo and building it is like one of the first things that happen.
Like the source, yeah.
The source,
Interestingly,
and then there's,
yeah. The only reason I put
tagging, was it about tagging the revision control state? Because that's generally going to happen before build in a lot of cases if you're building releases.
That's what I'm wondering. So in the Plogios reference pipeline, which I didn't write, I was just using it for reference, tag comes early, and I think that might be their use of the term. So maybe we have two different kinds of tagging, right?
Yeah, typically, in my experience, we want to know, like for a trunk-based development, when you have a single main branch, and if all the other work is getting done on sub branches, and once they pass all the tests, they go through, the PR is approved, and all this stuff that they have confidence to be able to merge it into the main branch. The delivery pipeline really begins at the merge into the main branch, but a tag of was it successful? Was the delivery successful to production, and everything is now running in production? The tagging comes after that, and it's only the tag that lets us know that, okay, this is what's in production now. So that's just
Right.
been.
So this is the difference between software development and software deployment. In software development, you're quite often going to be tagging the state of the software at a given point in time, after a certain milestone, whatever, but that may be a signal to deploy or to attempt to deploy, and then to roll back to a prior tag. Tagging the state of the Git repository, for example, is not going to be the same thing as tagging a particular container image that's been built from that software.
Yeah, and exactly to your point, you just mentioned tagging in this particular thing here, in this write-up, I see tag as, it's more, at least it states it as semantics, annotate source code, or images. Well, the image doesn't exist until it's been built. So the build part has to be before this. Or
they mentioned in the inputs that generated binaries are one of the inputs for this stage. And we don't generate binaries until after build. So I think
okay,
makes sense.
I think it's two tag steps that would happen, and one would be tagging the source with the revision, and one would be tagging the image, I think. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and there are a number of these that we definitely run more than once. And some of them are pretty generic, like scan, right? That covers like a static application security test, and it covers what, linting, license checks. There's a lot of different things. And yeah, when I look at real implementations, I see scan steps just kind of scattered almost willy-nilly, right? But as long as I know that this is a scan that's doing a lint, then I can check something off in my tool that says, okay, they linted, good, right? This is a dynamic security scan. I can check a box that said, okay, you did a dynamic security scan. You know, I'm going to let you proceed to production or whatever. That's what I'm trying to accomplish with these. Really, is like at a higher level, having a tool be able to understand that these steps have happened, and that they semantically mean kind of the same thing. Because I think every company changes the tools.
Also, some, like, now this is again a question. I'm not trying to say what is there is wrong, but there may be some activities that may not be run as steps distinctly, like without any specific endpoint. For example, there must be a starting point. Maybe like you have something running on production and you continuously observe that and trigger certain actions based on what may be happening. If you consider those parts, like I think I put a comment to stages or steps, I don't remember, like this cloud native deployment strategies, for example. Like you may have a canary stage and like you may not have a distinct step there, like tagging, which may, you know, activate certain actions depending on type of KPIs that are collected from your running deployment. I know maybe there are steps or stages like rolling back or rolling out, such things. I don't know, I'm making sense, but yeah, I think those things, different type of strategies that are not like traditional CI/CD pipelines maybe, but they are more like new type of getting things kind of users and then doing stuff depending on what you observe.
Right, that's a deployment strategy.
Yeah.
Probably maps to some steps somewhere.
Yeah, it's just putting it out there. I haven't made my mind up yet. That's why I am asking.
If I understood, Anne-Marie, you're saying that tag in this case would be represented in multiple places in the pipeline, theoretically. We might have a download source code, tag source code, and then later build source code, and then tag build. But the thing we're trying to get here is tagging is a semantic activity that happens in the context of a pipeline.
Right, right.
That makes sense to me.
I've also seen people tag the artifacts of the build, right, as having passed a certain stage or something like that would be another type of tag. Yeah.
So I think from a SIG event perspective, or CD events, I guess, this can be extremely helpful, because one thing that we're discussing now is like what kind of different activities or steps or stages or whatever you want to call them can we have in a pipeline. And since one of the goals of CD events is to enable observability, then it really helps, like you said, Anne-Marie, like, okay, there are scans scattered all over the place, but if everyone who observes it can agree that, okay, this is a scan, so I know how to visualize it or how to present it. Maybe there's a special icon for scans, so that we establish like a common, both a common terminology and a common set of like icons or visualizations of that can really help bring like a full workflow together, even if you have different systems everywhere, but everyone calls it a scan, so the visualization or observer system knows what it is. But I see this as very helpful, this kind of list of steps or stages, or what we call them.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I wanted to do by sort of defining what the inputs and outputs are, I mean, we want to literally be able to swap out some of these steps. Like I want to be able to have a pipeline defined that says, okay, do your build, and whether you do a Node build or a Java build or a Python build or whatever kind of build, then I know that as my next step, then I can go point Sonar Cube at it, right? As long as you put the artifacts in a place where I know they're going to be. So
yeah,
or code cover, whatever. Yeah.
So Matthias actually called us from CD events over here, because this is a discussion. I mean, a list like this could have a very positive impact on the work to establish the events protocol, because it would support interoperability, as you say, between devices. So it doesn't matter, exactly as you said, if it's a Python build or Java build, or Python maybe Go or something else. The inputs and outputs are the same, so we can connect them to the next step easily, because we have a definition of what the inputs and outputs are. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, another thing I see is like the discovery, that's the thing that would generate like your dependency graph, right? And from there you can have a tool, you can have different tools that can generate a bill of materials off of that. And then you can have scanners that look at those things, right? As long as you're using standard data formats. That's another thing that we want to do. So. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I missed any major categories, and some of them, like I said, was a little bit debatable. You can certainly
Just
debate.
out of curiosity,
Yeah.
You had a secret detection as its own like separate step. What do you see that is different from, for example, a security scan? Or why have a secret detection? I'm just curious.
The reason I did it is because it often has a side effect that it actually will revoke secrets.
So I mean, it changes the code.
For example, if you put a GitHub token in a GitHub repo, then GitHub will revoke the token, right? So like a token will stop working. Whereas the other types of scans, you usually only expect them to influence the build process or the pipeline itself.
Then I guess it may be more closer to, there's a step or stage called remediation, which is define something like scan for problems in the source code and fix them.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be more close to what we're talking about, because the security or secrets detection would also scan for not vulnerabilities per se, but information that shouldn't be in the code and then fix them, I guess.
There might be an argument that secret detection is a kind of remediation, maybe. It kind of is conceptually. I think in terms of implementation, it doesn't have secret detection, doesn't have the same dependencies. Like you don't have to build the code first, but I think conceptually it is a kind of a remediate.
I mean, there's a lot of static analysis implementations for finding vulnerabilities in source code as well that don't involve building first. So I'm not sure that's necessarily a distinction.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, does it help to have them as separate things, or do we think is a secret detection really kind of remediate?
I think it helps from a perspective of reminding people that they should make sure they don't have any secrets in their source.
Yeah.
But then that could be said for other things as well, I guess.
Yeah. I usually do see it called out with that name so that people immediately know what's happening. Yeah.
And actually, there's a corollary to that too. Again, I wasn't familiar with the GitHub example since I don't really use GitHub, but in a lot of the open source projects I work on, we do analysis of build outputs to try to find injected fabricated secrets. So you're basically stuffing your own made up secrets as inputs into the software, and then checking things like system logs to make sure that those haven't leaked through into the logs. And so that sort of secret detection actually does involve building and running the software to be able to execute it.
Yes. So does checking the logs fit into one of the things that's already here? Another example of something that requires something to be running is like a dynamic application security test, right?
Yeah, and I guess part of the question is that addressing application security analysis of things that are already running in production, or is that application security analysis of things that have been stood up in an automated, pre-merge analysis pipeline? Because you can pretty much do it on either end. Ideally, you do it on both ends.
Right. I don't know where something like log analysis would fit in. I mean, it could be an analyze step. It's very generic, but I have the dynamic application security test as a kind of a test in the examples up here. It's kind of like a test, but it's really more like
Sounds a lot like monitoring to me. Like deploy software, run some code against it, validate the software output, like checking logs or metrics or something seems.
The monitoring step, we could certainly add a monitor step here. Yeah.
I don't know if monitor is like implicit as part of some other step.
Well, I think they're all kind of composable too, because a lot of the things that you think of doing from the perspective of someone who's deploying software to production can also be done in the development phase of the software itself, if your focus is on software development and publishing releases of software for others to consume rather than deploying it yourself.
Mm-hmm. I usually don't see monitor in like a deployment pipeline, right? It's usually this thing that happens out of band is the only.
We do monitoring like as what we call like a canary release, where we, as part of the deploy, we deploy to 1% of boxes and then we wait and like look at the metrics. And if that's good, we deploy more.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems to fit in with progressive delivery. That's what I was thinking. But this idea, I'd actually hadn't heard of that, of doing a test build with fake secrets, literally looking for secret leakage in logs and stuff. That's a really interesting type of test.
I think that means someone owes us a blog post.
But again, that's something that you would be doing as the author of software primarily. I mean, it could be done on the consumer side as well, but it's, you know, it's a fairly standard technique in like system software that is going to need to be able to handle things like keys or other blobs of sensitive data.
I guess to me, it kind of feels like a dynamic test, right? Like you're putting data in there and you're looking for a certain output, and then you have to run the software to do it.
Right, it's functional testing as opposed to like unit testing or integration testing.
Yeah, this canary kind of thing, would you call it a monitor? Is it a monitor step, or is there something else that we're looking for, which is like it's like a deploy and wait for a while and see how it behaves kind of concept, right?
Yeah, so at Amazon, there's a notion of bake times on deploys. So like you deploy something and then it just has to sit there for a certain amount of time before you can progress. And so wait is certainly a step if we were to diagram things.
Yeah.
Something similar we've done with Canary deployments is to couple it with tagging on the revision control side. So we've got a set of systems that get continuously deployed from every change that merges to the head of the developing branch. And then those are evaluated on a continuous basis to make sure they're functional. But then there's a broader set of production systems that only get deployments from states of the repository that have a new version tag applied to them. So once we're comfortable that things are stable on those systems that are getting continuously deployed from master branch tip, then we will tag that state of the repository, and that is a signal that deployment should occur to the broader set of production systems.
That's another way to trigger one of these things. I was struggling with, do you think we should have like a trigger step? Probably.
Well, I mean, the CI/CD systems that I work with are entirely based around triggers. The pipeline definitions you'll see in the glossary for Zool are basically a mapping of triggers to actions. So I mean, triggering is something that potentially occurs at every single phase, stage, whatever you want to call it. Everything that happens occurs as a result of some sort of a trigger that's been defined in the system.
So is a trigger a type of a step, or is it a trigger a thing that makes the step execute? That's what I was kind of.
Yeah, it's more like input to possibly every step, even if it's something simple like a timer, like a cron job or whatever. That is a timed trigger, but the trigger is part of the input state of any of the stages.
I'm thinking about this like canary case and the bake time case, which may dovetail with this trigger notion, which is it seems like a wait with a condition attached. And so like one is a wait based on a timer. In the canary examples, it's a wait based on metrics coming out. And so like we would expect to see 5-minute time periods wherein there are 0 errors. And I wonder if we could generalize wait to be like wait with condition to maybe also be this trigger concept. Like we're waiting on a GitHub event, or I don't know if that's too generic or not.
Would these be
But I'm
considered
wondering-
like policy steps? So like this check needs like either time needs to pass or some sort of metrics need to be achieved.
I mean, I think those are concepts that are relevant to low-level CI/CD systems design, but they're probably more of an implementation detail when you get to the workflow level of we want this to happen and then this to happen and then this to happen, and based on these conditions, the trigger concept is probably more what the CI/CD system is built on, whereas the conditions are what's really relevant to when you're looking at the workflow layer of your layer cake, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe if we think of it as looking at a workflow, like if you're implementing a pipeline, would you see a wait in there or a bake? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I get like, it might be useful as maybe an addendum to this to come up with some example pipelines and then annotate them with the steps that they as they exist. Does that make sense?
Some examples?
Like, here's a real world pipeline. Here is how we would apply
These labels.
These labels onto that.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Because
Yeah,
like in Amazon, there's a specific step, which is bake time. And it's used, and it's like at the same level as like test.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the layout in the Amazon workflow is, you know, you get built, then you, after build, there are steps that happen, and then you progress to the next stage. And then the steps that can happen are like security validation and coverage enforcement and stuff like that. And then you progress to, I'm deploying to my like tiny cluster. And then you'll have like your end-to-end tests and so on. But one of those is like bake. And it just like sits there for 30 minutes. And another one is like metrics evaluation. You're like, I should expect to see this many successful requests come in before I feel comfortable enough with this artifact to promote it to the next phase.
Yep.
And some of that's policy, but not, I don't think it quite fits there in the same way.
Yeah, it's not really policy, is it? Semantically.
Yeah, like you might add
I don't
those
think I
because
have
of
anything
policy,
else.
but it's not like a policy enforcement step.
Right. I don't see anything else in here that is like evaluate metrics. So I think that would be a good addition too. Yeah.
Like analyze is the closest one, right?
Right.
And I would feel comfortable saying, like, providing some examples of what analyze might be.
Mm-hmm. Because metrics can have more than one meaning. I have seen analyze do other kinds of metrics, right?
I guess we still don't have a step that's weight, like whatever that is.
Yeah, definitely should add a weight state. Metrics evaluation is also what you just described is a little bit like verified deployment, but it's more, it's snazzier than that, right?
Yeah.
Usually verified deployment means just make sure the thing deployed, I didn't get any errors back and it's running.
Yeah, I would be happy with verified deployment being the like canary metrics vetting.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only change would be that metrics would be a possible input there.
Yep.
And then I think one of the results or side effects that might happen would be a rollback in the event that deployment didn't work.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm glad you guys think there's some value in this too. So,
Great.
okay, yeah, we're also looking to see if we can put some of this kind of functionality in Tecton upstream eventually, but that takes a while. For now, it's more like, you know, when we write our own new tasks, we can use these terms, right? And tag them for ourselves. So, but I would like to go to Tecton catalog and I would like to be able to say, show me all the static scanners. Thank you. So, okay. Unless anybody else had anything, I'm good for now. Just yeah, feel free to add any other comments on there. I took notes. I'll put another revision up based on those too.
Great, thank you, Anne-Marie. And then we were also going to look at the roadmap, but given that we have about 4 minutes left in today's meeting, I think we'll leave that for next meeting. Does anyone else have any other updates you'd like to contribute to the group, or any other conferences happening, things we should be aware of? Okay, just asking. Again, looking for a co-chair, so that email will go out soliciting possible co-chair volunteers. Suggest it to your friends if they seem the type. I don't know. Also think about it for yourselves. I'm sure any and all of you on this meeting would be an excellent co-chair. So great. Thank you. And thank you once again to Fatih. You've been awesome.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.